All right, so apologies for being slow. We will start with making a mandala offering for requesting a teaching, and then Geshe will lead the way with refuge and bodhicitta. Sashi Perki Chunchi Meto Tam Ri Ralingshi Nidegen Padi Sange Shindu Niteoma Idokunanda Shila Chupasho Guru Laknanda Lakandiyataya Sanji Chodan Sogi Chonanda Chanchu Badu Dani Kasuchi Dagi Chushigi Betsomangi Dola Penche Sanji Dukasho Sanji Chodan Sogi Chonanda Chanchu Badu Dani Kasuchi Dagi Chushigi Betsomangi Dola Penche Sanji Dukasho Sanji Chodan Sogi Chonanda Chanchu Badu Dani Kasuchi Dagi Chushigi Betsomangi Dola Penche Sanji Dukasho
Kangi Tuzini Zuni, Tawa Tamche Pambi Chere, Pambi Chuni Tenzi, Kwatam Kela Changselo. Good evening, everyone.
Ben. Ben.
Ben. Hey, cousin, do not tell you, Tati Chanson, Chene. In Karan, Tiora into your Marwas. Three Karangi in Tior Pichitan and George Lane in Karangi. Yanja and the Siucha Chedra, George Tangwainas, Hanas Lynch, Katutuch, in Karan Church and Chapudus Yana.
So good evening, everyone. So Ben is here with us today. So Ben came last week with his equipment, lots of equipment. He had a couple of questions for Geshe, and he wanted to also have Geshe's answers on tape. So he came with all the equipment, but at the end we ran out of time and Ben didn't get to ask his questions. So now we have take two. And Ben sent the questions to me. I asked Geshe those questions, so send those questions to Geshe just to let him think about what to say. And Geshe said it's complicated. You know, some of the points that Geshe thought of are complicated, but just for the sake of clarity, maybe you can try to ask your questions just for the audience and for other people, just to explain the background for your questions and to ask them maybe succinctly. Sure. Yeah, but let's do it bit by bit rather than everything in one go. Let's begin with question number one.
Sure.
Sorry for putting you on the spot.
Oh, that's all right. Should I provide the context like I provided in the email?
Well, the background, not the whole thing, because I mean, to be honest, I didn't tell Geshe the whole thing because kind of, you know, the whole Steiner school and anthroposophy and so forth. I think that's probably beyond the realm.
Sure. Okay. So, to put it simply, in the West, we're seeing the creep of the materialist worldview, which in my opinion, is explained most succinctly by the idea of we as human beings or living beings as being nothing more than biological robots.
Mm.
Our brain, they say that our brains produce consciousness.
Yeah.
And then when we die, the consciousness ceases to exist and it's like a light bulb going out. And so this is now in mainstream media, in schools, the scientists believe it, and so it's spreading through the world. And Rudolf Steiner warned about that. So I wanted to ask Geshe from a Tibetan Buddhist perspective, why is the materialist worldview an incorrect view?
지금 그나나 티어디 땅이봐. 제산디 티어 탐보디 다시된 지난제나 뉴트럴라 미만보치기 가레상교레스나 셰바세디 카시 케밀렘바치 카시 켈레나야 이네 셰바세디 레베기 잘레 첼레치 세기요레스 지나간소 끼에두 셰바키게레 시도 셰바 메바차게레스 제산디 레바기 제우다고 지기요레 제산 페제 사만도 나가서 삼록 카레 담바디 양 초와 카레 초로와디 사만 제토네 레베 제토네 제시기야기요레사 제산 그란 삼나디 대신남베 주디 따와디 진질로베 따와 지게로와 아니 진질로베 따와디 컨데치나스디 따와디 니지마이나 디라 뀨카레이나스
내가 저랑기 저기 지난다 남비추에 또 시작했나 당기만도 또 남비추에서 했지만도 그때에 댄센스키 치기요 말았어 또 치수 겨울무치 아니 지 야사도 쇠비가 아니 무서자고 만보내야 페비가야 아니 지 세리고 만보다야 통제나 제제나 조민나 하마들이야 겨울무치 남추티 댄센스 숨이야 치 남비 세리 남비타도 남비추에스 댄센스 숨이야 치나니 아니 그냥 이 같이 남비 세리 공통 아니 내가 고야 소리지 이제 들리러 차리고 왔어.
So to begin with respect to your question, early on when you approached that question with respect to materialistic view, the only way of addressing that was from the viewpoint of the Buddhist tradition that I said it from the very outset that we do have a consciousness and the consciousness functions in a particular way. But then, later on, particularly due to His Holiness the Dalai Lama, who initiated discussions with academic researchers, people that were well versed in scientific views, His Holiness started to develop his own way of presenting this issue and also having a dialogue with contemporary researchers. So altogether, he said that we can look at the Buddhist tradition and divide it into three aspects. So there is Buddhist science, Buddhist philosophy, and the Buddhist religion. So then your question pertains to Buddhist science. Of the three, right? Buddhist science, Buddhist philosophy, and the Buddhist religion. This question is relevant to Buddhist science.
근데 저랑기 먼저 기디기 시바기용으로 시디 담발라 아니 시바치도로 되는 지주조도로 세디 단누쇼 나로야 계제 지고 많이 봐 난치 마터 코니 따와 진진진이 용기어です요
So then, as Ben, as he pointed out, there was this view that, or there is this view that consciousness is produced when we're being born, and it goes away or it dies when the body dies. In that sense, you can say that consciousness comes with an expiry date. Not only that view is present amongst many, let's say amongst Western scientists, but also it existed in other places prior to the arisal of Buddhism.
Inza tanda charan nushok ba se ta so di nushok di serik ba di tadul ta shichugi giras to yin ya ji serik ba changsa wo di tanda charan la na shi chiwa tam bo di dense tam bo so ri ni ngang ji ke ba dang shiva ki shiva ta shiva zo ba se di changsa gi la wi yo de then leg sabachana samgumdos ta khashi didida saba chechogoros ina ida dil laba ina tele kyon khariyos lana ngui netsulaya ngo samda ani gawadi yasan kyawang hama thending chemba kyawang hami ye ani chi ani chawari kyawang hami ye chi susuda pigi ani chi namire tenji sebu shu kendeni ngos yungores tsuda ani netan tida ngos ngayu chagorasra.
And as you said, it is quite, this view, a materialistic view, is quite common in the West, and that view believes or asserts that consciousness is developed or produced when we are being born, and it dies when the body dies, when we die. Geshe wonders is if everyone in the West would agree with that, if all academics or researchers would agree with that. Geshe is not sure, maybe not, but still it is a common view. Now, if you wonder what's the problem of the folk with that view, well, to begin with, there are people that have vivid recollections from past lives. As such, you can say that it is directly negated by those that have some clear recollections of past lifetimes. And that being the case, we can come across those who have those vivid recollections, or we can know their accounts of those that have vivid recollections of past lifetimes. So that, in a sense, negates the death of a consciousness upon the death of this body.
Kyan chiwadi namada ya ani shiba singi levi zechi ya shagire mato ge achi nangshen sheba nangshen chi keleng mar sadi chudan levi zechi la shag sadi nangshen namada ya tumbu yores inaya lebi zechik buji revesla no and nancheni di killing manis lebi zechik mayimba ya shiba mangu shuji lebi zelia letsalia turgodi nancheni ya is serious takira.
Now, also in your question, you mentioned that many believe that consciousness is a function of the brain. In that sense, you can say that it is a certain substance of the brain. Now, the Buddhist tradition doesn't explain it exactly like that. In that, first of all, it does say that, of course, you could say that there is a compatibility, there is something compatible with the position that there's some, let's say, brain substance in the function of consciousness, in that consciousness depends upon, for example, our neurons, the brain structure, the channels or the neurons that function in our body. Definitely, consciousness depends upon them. And therefore, you can say that consciousness has some dependency upon brain substance, let's say.
Hida Mintumbachi, Muyan Nisulaya, Kariungo is Laungi, Tao Hida Mintumbachi. Nanzu Chiluk Membi, and maybe Shivari Sini, Tarjan Shedro Mamuchi, Nambi Shoni, took them said the Jawan, took them to Yurumushun, and in Minishtab and Dawadi, and shooting it, Tendugi, Seligi, Tajichon, and Kanji Semla and Gandhi on the Ajda, Kashikashi, and Shimundus Lagoya Soba. Indeed, wasn't the two words that.
But not only that, also with respect to the birth and death of the consciousnesses, some believe in death and birth of the consciousness. There are documented cases of people that remain in what is called the clear light of death. So when a person is dying, there comes a time in which medically they will be pronounced dead. A doctor might be called in, will check that person and will pronounce them dead. Some people, and there are documented cases like that, particularly also recent cases in which a person was declared medically dead, but from a Buddhist perspective, the person was said to be still remaining in the clear light of death. So that situation is common more to those that are advanced practitioners that can remain within a certain state for a long period, in which medically they are considered to be dead, and still, from a Buddhist perspective, they are considered to be remaining within the clear light of death, and the process has not culminated yet.
Chigores, the D Tony Xiaomi took them Shubadi, Tata Lenga Tuyach. Kitty Tindich never enough, took them shoe said the Ko Shinaya, the Let's Anganaya, Ningits Anganaya, Nimanish Sadanaya, and Chik Subule, Tumamakaro, Mariba, there the Carriers Lounge, Lenga Kawich Chagores.
So then, for those people that remain within that state of clear light of death, they are pronounced medically dead. In a sense that, what would be the measurement for declaring someone dead? Well, Geshe said that he's not a doctor, so he couldn't say that in a way that is precise, but roughly speaking, when the heart stops beating and also the brain activity ceases, in general, you would say that that person is dead, right? So those practitioners that remain in that state, Tugdam in Tibetan or in English, the clear light of death, can remain for 20 odd days in that state. So medically they are dead, the heart stopped, brain activity stopped. This is considered to be external death. The external death has occurred, but not the internal death, in that they remain within that state without the body decaying, without the body fading away, so to speak. And there are recent documented cases from this year or from recent years of those practitioners who were documented to, to have gone through the external death, but the internal death, in which the consciousness is still within the body, has not occurred yet. So they've remained within that state for a longer period without the body decaying.
The D and the D to them shoot the Naravang was Jevadi, and the children go the good to Kosum Koshitavare and Serichilaya, and it Geshe emergency, the Chavia Buchira, Kumbazoli, Dimanta, Ye, Kigin, and the number of the canon chief, Simjayos at the Gallo de Pagas of the Yara, Kung Shavuchosum Tata, Gisela the Shavuchosum Tata, shooters. The most genuine. Teni Gandhin to Jabati, Jabati, Kung Tanaya, 아니 로산이만 쇼데스 콩 샤부 쪽게로 쇼데 니동 니동 예를 걸지 가지 드리마 다장기 내치리에 나 다장기 살지니 콩 고동도 비리에 아니 대봉 쇼연자 채나고 tel야 아니 먼저 짜바인스 아니 갑투디 아니 사와요레 아니 지 제공간데 따지 아니 도저 야가 도저 장수 아니 신인주 신기 담 신기 신만은 야가 도저로야 지 남시 초장 칸데 요네 아니 야가 도저기 대사카게 나로야 지 장로로 서버 딘디 차긴 카리요네 딘디도 지 상을 땅원이 양생도 저레스 샤고 쫄기 쉬우데스 안데 괜찮으셔도 좀 와서 디 먼저 아니 다도는 제대들이 타이완이야 아니 게시 참바장소 아니 세르지 게시 참바장소 샤고 뉴스서 김치 슈선스 세르부터 깨다 따치시 간지 딘디기 다 원성다 아니 겔데바 딘디 용거레스 간지 시바 깨바다 시바 깨치와다 시바 가도세 이게 내장 인장 가바다 아니 시바 가도세디 아니 디지털 수도로나 낸 싸우니 야무퉁이 내가 너무 차고했어.
So just a few cases to give you some examples. There was a great scholar in Geshe's monastery called Pema Gyaltsen, who passed away around 1993. One of Geshe's teachers is the current abbot of Namgyal Monastery, Chamdog Rinpoche. And this scholar, Pema Gyaltsen, lived just behind Geshe's teacher's house, passed away in 1993, and he remained within that state of Tugdam, the clear light of death, for 13 days. And Geshe, no, it's not that Geshe heard about this case, he actually was there when it happened, right? So he witnessed that himself. So medically, that person was dead, but still, he remained within that state for 13 days without the body losing its freshness, without the body decaying, and so forth. That's one case. Another one occurred around, let's say, 2008. At that point in time, Geshe was part of a team of administrators at Sera Monastery. So they held a certain position, a certain responsibility. And around that time, the head of the Gelugpa tradition, which is called the Ganden Chirinpoche, it was the 100 in line, passed away. He remained within that state of Tugdam for 18 days. His name was Lobsang Nima. So Geshe also, in his responsibility as one of the team of the administrators of Sera Monastery, had to travel to Ganden Monastery to offer his respect on behalf of Seraje Monastery. Now, for those of you who are familiar with India, and particularly with South India, where Ganden Monastery is located, you know that the conditions are very hot, right? So it's a hot climate, sometimes just hot, sometimes hot and humid, and there's no refrigeration or air conditioning. So during that hot climate, the Ganden throne holder, the head of the Gelug tradition, remained in that state for 18 days. After his heart stopped beating and his brain ceased to function, for 18 days again, without the body showing any signs of decomposing or decaying. Now, recently, this year, there was a case of a Geshe that resided in Taiwan called Jampa Gyatso, passed away this year, and he remained within that state for 28 days. And it was a good situation because it gave an opportunity for medical doctors and also scientists to go and examine what's happening, particularly in this situation where medically that person is dead, and yet there are no signs showing of the person decomposing and so forth. So it was a good opportunity for conducting some academic research. So Geshe is mentioning those cases because then again, going back to the materialistic approach in which there's that assertion that consciousness is produced from the brain, which means that it is produced from birth, and upon death it passes away, it ceases. Well, how does it add up if you then think about it from the viewpoint of the clear light of death. Now, you would say that if you follow that materialistic approach, upon death, consciousness should have ceased. Or you could say that upon death, then all the signs of death should have followed through. But then in those special cases, it hasn't occurred, which is an indication actually that death hasn't occurred yet, since consciousness is still there.
Di gyunzen la drong das ra anzu gi gyunzen pi gi ta chi rigpe lam gyunzen ten drong ni ani kaso ta chi gandu meva chi thola ya ani drogo das ten ten sang gi cheli bai ni ya cheba chen thong tu bai na ani kenne thong ma tu bai na ko medicine lagu mardinia ke manawadia namju yubi la nambi shon sheba na ombu numbu gu and dodan chagwares ra.
So of course, when you start to look into such affairs, such issues, some would not accept your position. They would say that, for example, with respect to that state, the clear light of death, they would not accept that state. They would say that there must be another reason for that. There must be another way of explaining that. But we still need to follow a certain rational path, a rational process. In order to approach that, we need to see whether whatever position someone else presents, whether it invalidates the position that we have from our point of view, pertaining to the existence of consciousness. So are they invalidating, are they contradicting our position, or are they not contradicting our position? So if you were to conduct a research and investigation, and you are looking for a particular thing, it might be that you're going to find that thing, or might be that you're not going to be able to find it. But not finding it is not always tantamount to proving its non-existence. Not finding something in a particular research does not mean to say that it doesn't exist at all. So you have to look at what conclusion is drawn from a certain research. Just kind of disagreeing with the position that consciousness does not die when the body dies, and saying that there must be other explanation, is not always a logical reason. You need to see whether a certain logical reasoning is presented in a way in which it completely contradicts the assertion of the existence of consciousness in the way that it is expressed in the Buddhist tradition.
Shibit namsha dishyamudi rimbat masona rimbashi legores pigi rimbashi legores ra tumdashi.
Now, there are those who say that consciousness is part of brain. Now, from a Buddhist perspective, when we look at what consciousness is, there are 4 different levels to the explanation of consciousness. So you could say that there are 4 different levels to the explanation of consciousness, and those 4 levels are presented by 4 Buddhist schools of thought, or 4 tenets, which are arranged in a sequential order. from the lower tenet to the highest tenet, which is called in Buddhist terminology, the tenet of the middle way, the Madhyamika tenet. There are two sub-schools to that school of thought. There is the middle way autonomy school of thought and the middle way consequence school of thought. The final view within Buddhist philosophy is the view that is presented by the middle way consequence school of thought, and therefore also the explanation of what consciousness is in a more subtle way is explained by the middle way consequence school of thought.
Tirda the umma bigi nangloya and bigi donga ni chigodos. Donga ni chimi so di tardusa di and nga and gyuji kumba tardugotelia and tuni tardugondi and teletun shigores.
But not only that, also when you look at what consciousness is according to the middle way school of thought, you can take a sutra approach to that and a tantric approach to it. And the explanation of what consciousness is in the most subtle way is explained according to the tantric tradition, according to mantra.
Tinza da tanda shivadi levi chashiri sayada and shivadi leze tonu yungor say levi zelaya zeg tonu yungor say di tangarang samsuchina di chidang only tanigi shimju shiuchik chebigi tumrichin tongudosra.
So then going back to the way that consciousness is held by others, like for example, in some fields of contemporary science, some hold it to be a part of brain. Some consider it to be sort of a substance of brain. Some explain consciousness on the basis of neurons. Geshe feels that those explanations are not worthless. Actually, some of them are going quite deep in trying to explain what consciousness is.
Inaya bi levi chashi reveslavna levi zich revesna shibadi di munzin chetuga mares.
Because levegi jebu yamna keu.
Jebu dia jebu dia and kalka mares ra.
So although looking at consciousness from the viewpoint of, let's say, neurology, trying to explain it on the basis of the brain functioning, the neurons and so forth, is a subtle explanation, is going quite deep. It's still not adequate enough in explaining what consciousness is. Now, also, if you consider consciousness to be a product of the brain, you can say that while it does depend upon the brain to a certain degree, still it doesn't give you a comprehensive explanation of what consciousness is. So those types of explanation are still lacking.
Tirda levi chashi chik resde de di and level ya shiva mamuchi rangan soa soba mamuchi benangan namshi chukchi ondira ani namshi ngadi zu ongbu sujembala ya level ya tembati tare level ya tembati nampi shonya sungores.
So then when we look at consciousness from the viewpoint of Buddhism, there are different types of consciousness. First of all, there are 5 sense consciousnesses. And their description in Buddhist scripture is that they function through certain mediums, they function through what is called sense powers. In that sense, you can say that it corresponds to the way that consciousness is presented in contemporary science, in that consciousness functions, for example, through the brain. So there is something that mediates the function of consciousness in the same way that consciousness functions through the sense powers, which are physical forms, according to the Buddhist tradition. So then, if you say that those sense consciousnesses are part of the brain just because they depend upon the brain, well, there are certain arguments that can be presented that will invalidate this position.
Bena Shashis Laundigi, Yanglag Sorich, Ra, Pig, and Kumbudo to my teaching Shashis Lavoras, Dindigila Kogoras. Tanganzu Lu Yons Zovati, level here, then you have Geshe Yadamaras. Ra. Ludi, level than Java, level the day of the Geshe Yadamaras. In level the Lu Chashirimado, Ludi, Levi Chashila, Shana, and Pident and Jagiomaris.
So when we say that consciousness is part of brain, we make a distinction between the whole and a part. Right? So to be a part of something, it means that it is a branch of it. It's something that is a part of a whole. So for example, you could say that we have body and we have brain. The body is not part of the brain, right? Because if the body is part of the brain, would mean that the brain is a whole and our body is just one part of it. But of course, this is not the case. So the brain is a part of the body, right?
Yeah, but this is that the Yinaya, Nanzo on Shingadi, Ombo Surjembalaya, Teni, one shitty, Yula Jukovadi, Nambi Shonamaya, Siu Shushin Yoris. The data Chadawatch, Ra, and Zoo Pandachi, no show, and it's Samgum Shigba Mateo Zugi, Zugi, and one sheet ton. Mother Yishi Tamudi, the Tinsan, the younger mother, the monk, Yishi Tamudi, when they chat Kawachagoras, Ra.
It's anybody that's all this Yishi, but then the dish Gagarwa. Lugija, but then the Shida Jita.
The big one shing Natalia, so what? So what down, 6 said. So, and Ombo, Letzalia, those of Chedi, one shing at Chagaris level.
So then from a Buddhist perspective, when consciousness is explained, we not only speak about mental consciousness, but also sense consciousnesses. Now, the sense consciousnesses function through certain mediums, which are called sense powers, which are physical, which means that there are parts of the body, which means that our consciousnesses function through parts of the body. Now, Geshe reckons that from a scientific perspective, when the functionality of consciousness is being explained, quite often the realm of our physical experience or sensual experience is being investigated. Like, for example, what kind of experience, what kind of sensation, what kind of feelings do we get through the senses? So quite a lot of focus might be placed on our sense consciousnesses, but then from a Buddhist perspective, there is another level of consciousness, which is mental consciousness. So while our sense consciousnesses function through certain mediums, the sense faculties, the sense powers, which are physical forms, they have physicality. The mental consciousness doesn't depend upon a physical thing in order to function.
These are onshi ngai Jesu drongingi, and yilo rabadi, onshi that doesn't change chagoras, so we Jesu jambada, tell us over these are the zoo and piggy lesser than Jawabach, Kazna, onshi gun, onbi gun drogenza, and Jawabach chagoras. The inaya Yishitamudi, Tanshiva Naji, and two dollars of Gauki, need a Yishitamudi. Let's say, two mevadi, Titon Drugores, Letzanka, Hinzanka, Chao Machi Vikalia, and D, indigenous to Yeti, the Nambition Shavana, and Sam Tamudi, Neobati, Sam Gi, Ludi, Matur Vikalia, Sam the Luni with the Kamati Vikalia, and Lulia, 아니 손집 연구여 같아.
We have mental consciousness, and the mental consciousness has different levels. It is clear that coarse levels of mental consciousness do relate to sense consciousnesses. They often follow upon sense consciousnesses. Like, for example, our mental consciousness recalls things that we've experienced physically. Right? So it is quite clear that coarse levels of mental consciousness do follow upon sense consciousnesses. They can think, they can recollect, and so forth. These are coarse levels. But there are more subtle levels of mental consciousness. And when we go back to the state that we've just mentioned, the Tugnam state in Tibetan or in English, remaining in that clear light of death state, at that point, when the heart function ceases, when mental activity ceases, there's still, and one remains within that state, the clear light of death, there's still mental consciousness, which is subtle, that still remains within. Now, from the point of view of the Buddhist tradition, the point of death is not the separation, the stopping of the heart or the stopping of brain activity. The point of death is the separation between body and mind, which means that so long as the body and mind have not separated, death hasn't occurred yet. So then, medically, someone might be pronounced dead. But still, if the body and mind are not separated, which means that if there's still subtle mental consciousness that dwells within, not separated from the body, death has not occurred yet. This is the state that is called the clear light of death. Now, when you look at the explanation of that subtle mental consciousness from a Buddhist perspective, it goes to a more subtle explanation than what you find in, let's say, contemporary science. So from the point of view of contemporary science, you might speak of neurology. From a Buddhist perspective, an explanation that is more subtle is referring to elements such as, for example, the wind or the energy that goes together with the mind, and also a system of channels upon which that mind functions.
The insubordinate machines in a P. That no shock that removes another terrible to the shed on the Levi Zech reset. Lamge yourself, Levi Zech said. Zelia, Ombo layer, two guns, Zech layer, 2 hours, Zech layer, 2, you'll be Rigo goddess. Shibadiro, Zech layer, 2, you'll the Rigo goddess. Kedzit Zed Chico Shiba in by now. And Z the union tail the and Yulaya P. Z the chip never chick. Z Coronaya and then to you never chick Nisha Kegros Tapena. In a Nambi Shoni low down and P. Shiba the union Tabatarang. And you'll see which are Tagarani, Shiva Shago or Mado, you Korang Tinglaya, and Shiva Yobat Shagio Mares.
In a Wambodilla de Leocrem.
Z. Z the Union Cheondi.
Oh.
Z Tungo to La Guarada. Z Tungo and Yug Montoyak. Ah. The Nambi Shon Shavana, you Ton Segmaris, could you deceive chat Tagarampi and Shiva Shagrimato, till it change Shiva Shaksuyomaris.
So then, from the point of view of the Buddhist explanation of the way that a consciousness cognizes an object, it says that for example, with respect to our sense consciousnesses and the things that our sense consciousnesses perceive, there is an object, there is consciousness that works through sense power. Through the facilitation of the sense power, a consciousness and an object can meet, and then a consciousness can become clear with respect to the object. In that sense, it meets an object. It knows an object. It cognizes an object. Now, if you say that consciousness is you can say a substance of the brain, it is part of the brain or substance of the brain, it would mean that the thing that facilitates the cognition of an object is a certain substance, which means that the substance itself needs to have a quality of seeing the object or cognizing an object. So then the way that the Buddhist tradition approaches that is saying that when a consciousness knows an object, the knowing of an object is simply being clear with respect to the object, illuminating the object. It is not that the substance itself, the faculty, sees the object, it is the consciousness that sees it. So the seeing of the object cannot be explained just in relation to the object. It's not that kind of objectively an object is seen, but an object is seen, an object is cognized through the meeting between the consciousness and its object. Consciousness illuminates the object. Consciousness knows that object.
Lagdun di chik wangshi nga kedan di wangbo didang the ombo ti and suk tamuchik. Diko lebi zeres labayna shushu gawa maros. But didang yul nibu trebana wangshi ki yogat shigores.
With respect to the working of sense consciousnesses, it says that they function through the sense power, which are considered to be subtle forms, which means they are subtle things. So in that sense, Geshe feels that if you take those subtle forms to be parts of the brain, you can go ahead with that. Geshe feels that there is no particular problems with saying that the thing that mediates the function of consciousness in cognizing an object could be part of the brain. That would be those subtle forms, sense powers. So what was your second question?
The second question is what are some of the, from a Tibetan Buddhist perspective, what are the ramifications of holding the materialist view, the idea that reality exists independently of consciousness? What are some of the ramifications of holding that view to be correct? So for example, if you've got, I've been to Asia, been to Cambodia, which is obviously a Buddhist country, very different culture to here in Australia where it's been westernized. So, for example, here in Australia in the West, there's almost like a cultural saying, YOLO, which stands for you only live once. So it's that belief is becoming entrenched. So I'm wanting to know what are some of the consequences of holding that belief?
Dila cheka niba de karasena ta peche tensan ranshingi drube tawa yamena de yugi tendu yobe tawa de peche bebo chabar was ni tawa de shuchimbo zemoina dila penyun karayonas pena tensan the chigela yamena de chizo mambochi la kare sangyoresena ngazo kiawase de ses ti kasa sogdanse de temachimato deragi mares denso sang kiwo kandechi kiwo devo kepsang penyun kareto na jigres kansana kiawachimato yomares chensan de peche the Yugetendu yoba di tawachi kelen la dewo yore amal hanchingi duba rawangu duba den de pishes di la dewachi yosaresa di la tawaden dawsi shukchembo zimba ina penyun karyonas pentotang kyun karyonas
단 ambition 있으나 게임 바시로 왔어. 라. 근데 제요 말았어.
Well, first of all, if you hold that things exist independently or objectively, from a Buddhist perspective, this type of view is completely mistaken, completely erroneous.
학도는 대체랑기 식탐한데 개원 디자마도 디니 세편이 강의요 말이 디랑이야 결산 가르라바이나 디 약슈리 삼로 디 배 마스바더니 잠분이야 아니 내견 치고라서 삼로 디 토니 아니 랑게 셴팡이야다 셴을 세워치에 삼로 그래서 내가 소소를 계산하는 디디거라 그래서 참으로 욕tra 차야 규조지 차로 그랬어 잠시만요.
And particularly the last part of your question that referred to a common attitude that is common in the world at the present, you only live once, is such a great problem. In that if you do trust that you only live once, that there is no continuity after the transference from this life, it gives rise to a behavior that is seeking one's own benefit, even if it comes at the expense of others. We seek profit at the expense of defeating others. We want to be victorious over others. We're on the victorious side. Others are going to be defeated. So this attitude of you live only once is, you can say, is the gateway to this faulty behavior in which we only seek pleasures, happiness, profit, and so forth, even at the expense of others. It produces so many problems and difficulties in the world in this day and age.
먼저 지소 코란 덴자 매버지 소샤르도 왔어. 사무디 지소 덴자 매버이나 소수 지소디 길이야 되고 그러왔어. 아니 덴자 큐니면서 지소지 길이 되나 기부 관행이 그랬어.
덴자 said you come to the color.
대보다 지배부.
So this attitude also creates a situation where society cannot remain and function in a good way, in a healthy way. You know, it deprives us of social well-being, so to speak. In a sense that since we live in social communities, we are social species, we have communities, we live with each other. This type of attitude ensures that we will not be able to live in society, in our social fabric, in a relaxed, calm, and in a society that has a greater degree of well-being.
기부 대보 중요해야 kuyu jungu das ra pen chongba jin bai na ani pi soda jin bai na su je bi chala de drasa gi nyongi gu kuyu jungu das tin nan shin gi nanzo denja yong ya gi kuyu ju ma tu bai na ani yong ma ra tinza ani 단디 samlo di denja gu kuyu khora torjum che samlo zo re das ra.
So this attitude of you live only once, in which we seek to get a certain profit, benefit, even if it comes at the expense of others, is disruptive not only to society, but also the environment that we depend upon. And the environment can be understood on different levels. Like, for example, if you think of, if you're a businessman, if you have a certain factory, you're producing something, the environment that you function within is your consumers. So you need to create certain ways of relating to those people, that you can relate to them in a way that is positive, in a way that is wholesome. If there's disruption to this type of relationship, your business will fail. So similar, when we look at our environment within human society, in order for that environment to function, we need to create a certain situation, a way of working with each other, which will ensure kind of easy, smooth, or good way of interacting with each other. This attitude of you live only one is an attitude that eliminates, that obliterates our ability to work with each other in the environment of human society.
그래서 다 기왕 하시생이 켈란 바이마 kuyu trumbala ya jatang pengoles ra ani ko kewa gyun drundi tele ya chi dhyan kibu dewo chi yongya gi tola ya samtang go ras tichi digi ani shenla tsewa chewa ta maraw chewa soba o dimji gi ta midi gyu chagre islam di ngepar de tosun jamsun che ko chi ra tichi digi ko kewa nga shi ye kyang rong me kyang rong nga thong na rong man thong na rong kanji nga la ya 아니 기부 대보 용어야 kuyu 좀 차진 지금 뭐디 베시우 차도스.
Whereas opposite to that, if you trust that past and future lifetimes do exist, which means that there is a continuity between this lifetime to the next, Geshe feels that you're creating a certain social fabric in the environment of a social environment, which is constructive for the sake of society well-being, social well-being. And that when you consider, for example, your state of well-being in this life, other lives as well, in seeking to have good state, pleasant states, and so forth, that will not only exist in this life, but also in future lifetimes, then you start to look at your behavior and the way that your behavior influences your relationship with others in the society. So you then start to avoid things which are considered to be detrimental to yourself and others in this life as well as in future lives. So, for example, attitudes in which you deceive others, you cheat others, you take advantage of others and so forth, you start to view them from the viewpoint of how do they influence your relationship with others in the environment of human beings in our society, not only in this life, but also in future lifetimes. So in that sense, it helps to develop kind of more healthy structure in human society. So was that answering what you've asked? Yeah.
Thank you.
Dila Marshall and dila changed.
Correct.
So that's enough with your questions, right? Cool. So Marsha, you have a questions about the Bodhisattva vow, right? If you're still with us. All right. So it is related to the 7th in line. So harming an ordained person, inflicting violence on them, or causing them to disrobe. If a Sangha lost their root vows, are they still considered ordained? If they are imprisoned due to wrongdoings, this is considered a harm done by a person who brought them to prison. Dila Quran Jansen doma tola chiwashwa. Ta di tsatun dumba dilayan di chawa ta ani the domba shoya ya mana di dendachi also di yoja choya ya mana kimbala bawa chuba dendachi tsatun shwa ta chidan jena dila khala giresena the gendumba inarwa gendumba ina tsatun dende shoba ina konzoyan Sotagi dombala somebody domba di and the pamba chagirves di chikche chiwa nipa di karresena tadila kesi gendumba chi ta chinge di chewa ina ani aso police la draw ina konso chimla tawa ina so zonganla chuba inarwa ni gendumba zonganla tangi lengenchi yatsan dilatene jansen domba tsatundende kugirves
kujimares tanda chanju sembi tsatung tige soder gdombi Hamasingdi Yunguya Mares. Yunguya Mares.
So Marsha is asking questions about the relationship between the Bodhisattva vow and the vow of ordination. So just to begin with, they belong to different classes of vows. So if you incur a rude downfall with respect to the Bodhisattva vow, it doesn't incur a defeat in relation to your ordination vow or to the vow of personal liberation.
Tilda pigi chimgi chimbere and dansong we police lavora or dindila yako and Yakab Shungu Lega Yenza only chimge chingi suyimba ya Chava inare Lama inare Ani inare Migayina suyina ya di ku yutum the tumba chinza di Lega di chene and Chevapolaya Niva Jugati Yajadama Yujumaris.
Now, with respect to the last part of Marsha's question, in asking that if, for example, if they're in prison due to wrongdoings, is it considered a harm done by the person who brought them to prison? Well, Geshe says that we live in a society that follows a certain system of legislation. In order to abide by that system of legislation, we have courts, we have judges, we have policemen that are in charge of enforcing the rules. So whoever performs a criminal activity, could be a lama, could be a monk, could be a nun, could be a layperson, all of us are judged equally according to that system of law. So since all of us are judged equally according to the law, Geshe feels that therefore a person that has a certain function in that system, be it a judge, be it someone that enforces the law, a policeman, policewoman, Geshe reckons that it's not that they 100% incur that fault of imprisoning a Sangha person in the case of that Sangha person performing a criminal activity.
The be Chanjusebi Dombala needing in Baina and me Kyotoyadi, Susulega Maravas. And me Timla Jadi, Susulega Maravas. And Kyon Tombainaya, Pashani, Yunding Chon Takuris, Sonde Tiredos, Yunding Chon Tena, and Kevsana Kyung Chon Tena, and Kyongragores. Kaji, Diguchu Yamin Tonishan, Dilis in a chew Yamenda, and you need you turn pupil, legating Loga Shagolas. Then you take it down, do with us.
But then when you hold the Bodhisattva vow, sometimes you have to look at a certain situation in a way that is slightly different. In that, when you see someone behaving in a certain way, not in each and every situation you have to prosecute them. Not in each and every situation you have to report them to the authorities. And that's, in some sense, you can say that there are some situations where rather than looking at the faults of that person, it's better to look at the good qualities of that person, to remind yourself of the good qualities of that person. Having said that, we have the system of rules that was created in our society that needs to be followed. Then there are the attitudes that we take as spiritual practitioners or as those who hold the Bodhisattva vow. Not in all situations they need to be joined together. Right? So often you need to decide what's the best thing to do. Not always it works well to then mix those two systems together and try to marry them in a perfect way. Not always it will work.
And chö tending droras. Hardun to chick Suzuki, Bena, Chanchusi Domba, Sanga Domba, and chick 소더그 돈발로 소바 아니 지 슈사기 라마 기비신이래야 삼자나야 수수 셈마다고 돈이 아니 견 통한티지 윤거라스 이네 디균센 체네 아니 지 추케 melenging 디치기도 다가란 친구스 랍데와이나 아니 추 틸 데비 고마쳐서스 가지다 디 캔사우 차고레스.
So then, as a Dharma practitioner, sometimes you have to look at the way that you behave and assess whether you should behave in a way that is different to someone that is not a Dharma practitioner. Particularly if you hold the Bodhisattva vow or the Pratimoksha vow or the Tantric vow, you have to look at how does it affect your Dharma practice. Are you practicing it purely or correctly? Like, for example, when you rely upon a spiritual teacher, inevitably you might see a fault in your spiritual teacher. So when you see a fault in your spiritual teacher, do you need to react to that in the same way that someone that is not a Dharma practitioner views a fault in that spiritual teacher? So those questions arise in your practice, right? So you're a Dharma practitioner. How should you then react when you see a fault in your teacher? If you're going to react exactly in the same way that someone that does not practice the Dharma behave, it means that the way of practicing the Dharma doesn't really make sense. It doesn't really make any difference in our approach. So then when you're a Dharma practitioner, some cases are considered to be slightly different.
담념 세트 독자 쇼지츠 거레스 로 응마다 베나 장관용 선거 친구다 시기토 아니 기독교의 배상 콩다고 임바이나 지 대균주 슈침부 진인다 이게 말이네 간지 테스트 자우sun가 봐야 카탄딩이 디어바나 미트즈기 지 판로디치아 파샤니 아니 점나 순절이야 아니 마키버 치치 딘디진네 아니 라미 탐직 손이 조위비 로지어레스 카타야 파샤니 렌티 파샤 어디리 치고
거 미리 가서 코너 대화 마서지 거 집나라 한데
게르로지 듣는 거사
지선 게르로 첸나야면 미쳐버려
제르무치리아 지마강인데 견땅이 저거나 견땅이 밑에 저와치아 파샤니 이 전나 순진의 소소에 막히고 있지.
맞아. So then, particularly from a spiritual perspective, the samaya bond between a student and a teacher are considered to be very important. It is considered to be a grave situation, grave scenario when this samaya bond degenerates. So, for example, there's a story about Kedrubje, one of Lam Tsongkhapa's chief disciples. His name was Gelek Pesan. It was said that his samaya bond with his teacher, Lama Tsongkhapa, was so strong that when others came to criticize Lama Tsongkhapa, let alone he didn't want to create a certain contact with those people, he didn't even want to see the shadow or to step on the shadow. Not necessarily, he didn't want to come into physical contact with those people, let alone not physical contact. He didn't even want to contact the shadow. And it is said that since his samaya bond with Jerimpoche, with Tsongkhapa, was so strong, that even after Jerimpoche passed away, he had 5 different occasions in which he came to see Lama Tsongkhapa face to face. Right? So that was even after Lama Tsongkhapa passed away.
the Tama serious.
The bed.
The German side, Nimato, Pembato, Chichina.
So, therefore, this Samaya bond between a student and teacher is considered to be quite serious. Anyway, with that, Geshe says that we will bring this session to a conclusion. And this is the last Thursday evening session, not only for this year, but we're thinking of also maybe changing a little bit of the structure of the spiritual program for next year. Might be that we will, rather than doing Thursday evening sessions next year, we might try to introduce other sessions for the public during the weekend to allow more people to participate. So either on Saturday or Sunday, it's still work in progress. We still haven't really made any decisions, but at least as for this year, this is the last Thursday evening session.
This is that Jemanganzuki, the Sapabi Nandra, Sanimai Nandra, Telia, Losabina, Gotsondi, Peshe, Kazinki, Sapuna Shichin, Konzukashi, Suzu Lorgisha, Hadenza, Konzuko Ragalis, and Akashi Tison, Tinzangas di Kogo Chavana, Ninja,
Gedumba.
Kashi Negi Lorgite, Shero Chidoshi.
Kera.
I did the lessons in Yamita. And Lord Jimbo and Karen's machine go to it in the Yomartin.
So we're going to meet again next year. It might happen we might continue to do it on Thursday evening, so it might be on Sunday. We're just going to work out what's the best timing to do it. Anyway, last Thursday we had a special session. So Geshe decided to do something different last week. So we had stories that came from the monastic community here at Chinrezig Institute. We shared our stories with the people that were here and also the people that were at home with some questions and answers. And almost everyone got to do it apart from Geshe. So after that session, some people came up to Geshe and said, "Oh, no, all of us have shared apart from him." So, so next time that we meet together next year, he will also share his story for ordination. It's not going to be as long as our story for ordination. It might not be as eventful, but anyway, he's going to share it with us. So it's not only Geshe's story. We also have other members here of the community that were not here last week. So we had Tende and Venerable Demchok and Palyun. So we still have a few people in the pipe.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. Let's leave it here for now. Samcho Rinpoche Make Pana Gyuchi Kevanya Bame Pan Gone Kondu Pewa Sho Inyudu Da Lama Sangye Dubyune Drowa Chikyama Lupa De Sala Gopa Sho Kowe Shinkan Pendan Dewa Malu Jungwen Chenre Siwan Tenzing Yatsoi Shape Sete Padu Thank you Chi Sonju Jupe Lam Cheche Sonde Kante Chana Pemo Tenzing Yatsola Soa de so shendo lodo sho Chan shin chan gung Yahweh Tenzing yon pe we kun so do ho se Cho sung ko we le mun tu do Pa da so du je kun do Shakti Shlo.
Thank you.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. Good night. Thank you, people at home. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much. Very good.